Can you believe that? Something that we now use as a building block. It's like it was a tenth of the value 12 months ago. Sometimes you got to pinch yourself and remind you of where you are and what's going on. So, Ben, how should we get started today? I'm guessing
Yeah.
you want to talk about Bitcoin and pull up a chart, but what's the best way to start this discussion?
Yeah, let me show this screen. So can you see the screen that I'm showing right here?
Yes.
So this actually is actually the entire cryptocurrency asset class, not just Bitcoin. And the reason I like to use this one is because it more or less just shows where we are on the macro scale. You should recognize, though, that this is a logarithmic scale. So the market capitalization over here, this is a 1 trillion all the way up to 10 trillion. My speculation for this market cycle all along has been that I believe it'll ultimately go to approximately $10 trillion. But I've also been pretty adamant that I don't think that it'll hit that this year. I know there's a lot of people that have kind of assumed that we'll have a market cycle peak, this year. But I would argue there's a lot of evidence to suggest that we are going, we still have a long ways to go. And I think the basis for that understanding is really looking at things like the market cycle return on investment. If you sort of subjectively take market cycle bottoms and you plot out your return on investment as a function of time, you normalize them to all start on day one. There's a clear pattern here, right? And anyone can see it. Anyone has access to the data. It's just that the cycles tend to lengthen, and you also get diminishing returns. And it's really easy to understand why that happens. I mean, the cycles should have diminishing returns because, as we all know, as we just discussed, right, it's easier to see 100x gains and whatnot on micro cap cryptocurrencies in a relatively short period of time. Of course, a lot of them do end up going zero, but for Bitcoin to see a cycle where it goes up 500x, it's just simply not going to happen anymore. It just takes exponentially more volume to move the market capitalization just another 10x and another 10x. And so the whole argument is that, lengthening cycles and diminishing returns, and diminishing returns comes from what we just said. And then lengthening cycles, you could argue that it comes from the idea that, there's a lot more people every cycle. Okay. There's more people speculating, but furthermore, there's also more things to speculate on every cycle. Back in 2011, 2013, it was just sort of like, Bitcoin's going to be this peer-to-peer cryptocurrency that everyone's going to use. 2017, the narrative was more, okay, it's just a store of value. We're not going to really use it as peer-to-peer. But then you also had in 2017, you had the Ethereum ICO craze and everything that came with that. But then the problem with that back in 2017 was that all the 99% of the ICOs were just basically outright scams, to say it bluntly, right? They weren't actually focused on building something out that was actually going to, change the space. But you did have a few of them that were. And so people became pretty aware of that pretty quickly, that, all right, all this stuff is we can only speculate on it for so long before we realize it's just a lot of fluff. This cycle, you have a lot more than that, right? You have DeFi. Not only that, you have institutions pouring in one after another. I mean, Tesla bought $1.5 billion worth of Bitcoin. MicroStrategy has been pretty adamant. I mean, they've been buying Bitcoin pretty constantly since like $9,000 or $10,000. And furthermore, you're going to have more institutions coming in as well. And so from a fundamental perspective, it seems like, it should take longer to reach these higher valuations, but also we would expect the returns to diminish. So we look at a chart like this.
And what chart is this? What colors are they, just in case people can't see the legend on the top?
The blue line is cycle one, okay? And you can imagine if you go back to this chart over here, this is all of crypto, but if you can imagine, this is cycle one, cycle two, cycle three, and then we're currently in cycle four. Okay. And so it looks like this. And so the whole argument is, look, like a lot of people are assuming that, and I've spent a long time debating people about this over the years. A lot of people are assuming that we're going to have a major market cycle peak in 2021 because we had one in 2017, we had one in 2013. But my argument is that, that is somewhat cherry picking data, right? Because the first cycle lasted about a year. Second one was 2.5 years. That happened to be at the end of November 2013. Third cycle happened to be December 2017, but the first cycle peaked in the summer of 2011. So I think the idea that we have to have a market cycle peak in December 2021 is basically just sort of cherry picking, one data point and saying that that's what's going to play out again. But I think as you know, we're both fully aware, right? I mean, market cycle or markets don't do generally what everyone expects them to do.
Yeah.
So I think you basically look at this chart and you kind of come to the conclusion that look, like the cycle has lasted about as long as it lasted last cycle, but we should also note that there has been a discrepancy in cycle length. So I look at this and say, look, I think we're going to keep going on. I think we still have pretty clear skies as we head into 2022.
So these cycles are getting longer each time, and this current cycle hasn't hit the exponential returns of the other cycles. Is that what I'm seeing from that graph?
Sort of, yeah. And actually, one way to look at it is look at it on a linear scale.
Okay.
Look at the returns on a linear scale, and it fully depicts the diminishing returns we're talking about. Cycle 1, 700x. Cycle 2, 500x. Cycle 3, over 100x. Everything we've experienced this market cycle, all the ups and downs that Bitcoin has had, all the way from $3,100 to $69,000, and now we're back at 56K. It's all encapsulated in this little purple line that you can barely distinguish off the x-axis, right? You can barely even distinguish it. So what I'm sort of thinking is that at some point later this cycle, not necessarily, it does not necessarily have to play out in the next month, right? But at some point, we're probably going to have another leg, and we're gonna move back up and have one of these mania phases where we probably do have a blow off top, and then we're going to have to probably spend a couple years consolidating and building out at those prices, and then we'll likely just have another cycle after that.